Hi, I'm Rachel from GetThrough. We provide the best-in-class peer-to-peer calling and texting tools, and we're proud to be a sponsor of this year's Nonprofit Technology Conference. We've worked with thousands of organizations to send more than 1 billion messages since 2016. GetThrough provides ThroughText, which facilitates one-to-one text conversations at scale. We also provide ThroughTalk, the only dialer of its kind that can call cell phones legally. If you'd like to learn more about how to scale up your support or contact for fundraising, events, and more, check us out at getthrough.io or send us a note at info@getthrough.io.
What I'm passionate about is changing the status quo. We are an integration platform as a service that is dedicated solely to the nonprofit sector. We understand the vernacular and the terminology, and more importantly, the workflows of the nonprofits. The vision at Omatic is to integrate all nonprofit technology and democratize data access and insights for all nonprofits. Set data free.
If your mission is the eradication of some horrible disease, wouldn't it be wonderful if you actually worked yourself out of a job? I do believe that we have made significant progress in this country, don't get me wrong, but it would be amazing to work for an organization that was for a cause where they won.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to leave a little bit of time. I think we're just slightly early. We'll start in a few seconds just to give everyone a chance to join. All right. Well, let's get started. I'm sure everyone's really excited for our talk today. So what I'm going to be speaking on are design patterns and features that I felt could be improved upon, things that were fairly common that happened in 2020. I am a user experience strategist and designer at Kanopi Studios, and I work with a wide variety of clients. Mostly I focused on mission-driven organizations, but I also work with B2B organizations, B2C organizations as well. I have my master's in web design and new technology from the Academy of Art in San Francisco, and I have 8 years of professional experience with a focus on mission-driven clients. I actually started my career working mostly with nonprofits, and then since then have kind of evolved my palette because I really wanted to gain experience in other fields and also bring that knowledge back to my mission-driven clients. I've also included a QR code to my LinkedIn profile if you want to get in touch with me and connect after this presentation. Please feel free to do so. And I also have my email and a link to the Kanopi website up on this slide as well. I'm just going to preface this that like many other individuals in a time of COVID, I myself have gotten a COVID puppy. So let's hope that she's going to behave. But if you hear some pitter pattering around me, know that it's a dog with a toy at my feet. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are 5 things: carousels, pop-ups, sidebars, autoplay videos, and buttons. And we're going to go through what these things mean, what the user experience really is, why we should be really paying attention to how these features are affecting the usability and the user experience of our sites, and some tools and other solutions you can use to implement that would help improve the experience of your overall site. And then at the end, we'll have hopefully a few minutes for questions. So carousels, and when I talk about carousels, I'm specifically referring to carousels on the homepage, the infamous let's have all of the information above the fold. And I use fold kind of very loosely because nowadays the fold, it means a lot of things. I'm coming to you today from a 13-inch laptop, but I have colleagues who work on 27-inch desktop monitors, and a lot of your target audience might be using iPhones or Android devices, Samsungs, to be viewing your site. And just across those three examples, the fold varies wildly. So when I hear people mentioning, well, I want all my information about the fold, it, you know, it can be difficult to define what that really means to the individual. Maybe you can use analytics to determine this, but again, because we are designing now for a more responsive world, it's very difficult to kind of pinpoint what that exactly means. There are reasons why we should stray away from using carousels. One big one is that content is often missed if it's not in that first slide. So when we're using carousel design patterns, we are hoping that people are staying at the top of our screen and clicking the next button or waiting for the auto load to go through all of the slides to show us the rest of the information. And that's a lot to ask from an individual, especially an individual who is trained to be scrolling through the internet. Smartphones have made it very easy for us to just move our thumb up and down. And most people will just automatically start scrolling once they've loaded a page onto their screen. The second thing is depending on what you're saying in your first slide, if that content doesn't align to your values, to your mission statement, you can often provide the wrong first impression to someone. It takes about 3 to 5 seconds for someone to decide whether or not you are trustworthy or they've ended up in the right spot, depending on the goals that they are trying to achieve. And they can either stay or they can leave. So in that first impression, you really want to make the right impression about who you are and what you're about. And mobility issues. So the typical application I've seen of a carousel on a mobile phone is to have the image at the top and then the text below the image. And that's great for accessibility. We're making sure that everyone can read that content. However, that does mean that on a phone, I as a user have to click left and right to see all of the slides, and then potentially also scroll up and down to see what actually the content is in those slides. And that can be a fairly cumbersome exercise when I'm just trying to really get to the content as quickly as possible. A couple of better options. One thing I always try to steer my clients towards is just to choose a really impactful hero image with a really great elevator pitch that speaks to either key business goals or key user goals. You really want the people who are visiting your homepage, especially for the first time, to be able to understand who you are within the first 3 seconds. And that's stating either what your mission is, or maybe that's stating what value you can bring to your audience members. Another thing I really like, if you still really want to have a lot of content in one screen full, is using card design patterns. And this is an example of it here on the left side. It's a mobile application of this. But what I love about cards is that you can still have multiple pathways to content in one screen full. And if you expanded this mobile to a desktop, you could have 4 or 5 cards available to your audience in one screen full that doesn't require them to click forward and back or wait for some sort of moving carousel to change the screen so they can see all the additional content. So I really like cards as an alternative to carousel design patterns. Pop-ups. Pop-ups are something that I feel like we're all still dealing with, but I can totally understand the appeal, especially from a marketing perspective. I cannot argue the effectiveness of pop-ups. Marketers totally have it right. The conversion rate totally goes up if you're using a pop-up. But let's just break it down into theory. What a pop-up does is it hijacks the current flow that someone might be in on the page that they are on, and provides them with entirely new content or something to do. And depending on the timing, they may or may not have decided if you are valuable enough to interact with, to get involved with. There's other reasons why we should really pay attention to how we are designing and how we are deploying pop-ups. One big thing is SEO rankings. You may or may not be aware that in 2017, Google announced that any site who had pop-ups that made content less accessible would be penalized in their search rankings. So if you're concerned about how and where your site is appearing in Google search lists, this is something that you really should be paying attention to. And accessibility is another big issue that we deal with when we are looking at pop-up designs. Keyboard traps. So individuals who are using the internet with only their keyboard, not a mouse, just their keyboard, can often fall into or are unable to close pop-ups because they're unable to find the X button or the close button by just using their keys. So when you're building pop-ups, you really do want to be mindful that you're providing multiple ways for someone to exit that experience, not just with a mouse. The second thing is also screen readers. So let's say someone has a screen reader reading to them an article that's on your site. If after 3 seconds a pop-up appears, all of a sudden they're being read entirely different content that had nothing to do with the sentence they just read before. It can be quite jarring. It can be a little bit stressful, trying to figure out what just happened in the experience that I thought I was having. Things that we can do. So not all pop-ups are inherently bad. Google is not necessarily going to ding you for asking someone's age because your content has an age restriction, or if you want people to know that they're being tracked with a cookie and whether or not they want to accept that. Those kinds of pop-ups, Google is not going to ding you for because they are necessary for the privacy and for enhancing the experience of your intended audience. But there are a couple of things you can do if you still want to have that content available. One thing I do like utilizing are sidebars one, because I like the fact that that content will always be available on page. It's not there for a certain amount of time. So I'm allowing someone to choose when they want to interact with that content with me. Another thing, if you still want to use pop-ups, because I totally get the draw, is to make sure that the design of your pop-up takes up less than 50% of your page space. This is particularly important on mobile devices where we have much less room to play in. And Google is paying attention to what your mobile experience looks like. Sidebars. So I just mentioned sidebars. And I want to talk a bit more specifically about on-page navigation. So those like sticky sidebar menus. We see these a lot. You see these a lot with news sites or blog posts where you're being served up related content based on what you're reading on that page right now. You see sidebars used for generating conversions, to donate, to sign up for a newsletter. They can be very powerful tools. One application that was fairly prominent, I felt like through 2020, I saw this quite often, was the use of an on-page navigation system. And I think there were some poor applications of a sidebar, though I'm not personally really against using on-page navigation systems. But I do want to point out some of the traps that you can fall in as you're thinking about maybe utilizing these patterns on your own site. One is inaccessible content. So I think the thing that I saw the most in 2020 was, let's make our top navigation as streamlined and as simple as possible and put as few links as possible in there. And then we'll just use our on-page navigation, and that will provide a lot of different kinds of links. Now, what you're doing to your audience is you are basically having them click around the site in order to find the depth and breadth of knowledge that you have to provide them, rather than just having that available to them in your top navigation. The second thing that I noticed a couple of sites using were they were changing the sidebar structure depending on the link that someone chose, because you've all of a sudden landed in like a new channel or a new topic. And that is incredibly jarring. It can be very confusing for someone who's really trying to understand the structure of your organization and the structure of the content you're providing when you're changing up the navigation on them like that. So I really try to stop individuals from utilizing that pattern. Sorry, that's my dog running. And then there's also mobile issues inherent with sidebars. A typical application really of a sidebar on a mobile device is to have all of the page's content up top, and then you have all the sidebar links below. So you have to go through all of that page content in order to access those links. A couple of options that I like to provide to my clients. One is simple. It doesn't really require work on my end, but it does require content work on your end, is figuring out if you can combine similar pieces of content into one long page, because we are conditioned to scroll. And I know this can be a bit scary for people who might be afraid of providing too many scrolls or too many screenfuls for individuals, but there are total pros to using scrolls rather than clicks. One, scrolling delivers content more quickly because there's no need to wait for pages to load. It doesn't require a commitment from your users by forcing them to choose to click on a button, to choose a pathway to go down. They can just absorb that information on their own. And it allows people to digest information at their own rate. So 76% of the internet are scanners. They're usually scanning those headlines. So a long scrolling page allows them to scan the page much more quickly and to absorb a lot more information than if you were asking them to click to the next page to learn something else. If that's something that isn't necessarily interesting to you, or you still find that you have a lot of content that you want to link to even after you've done that editing process, I do like to use drop downs or mega menu design patterns in your top navigation. And the way I kind of define how I use top navigation drop downs versus sidebar content or sidebar navigations is, your top navigation really should be the 1,000-foot view into your organization. It should orient someone to the kind of content you're about to provide them or what you can provide them. And then sidebar navigation systems really should be a way to provide more in-depth knowledge and pathways once they've chosen a specific topic, once they've chosen a specific category of information on your site. That's how I really, in a general way, like to view top navigation versus sidebar navigation. I see we have a question. How long is a long scrolling page? Ooh, that's a great question. Again, very akin to what is above the fold because it varies wildly depending on what device you're using. So I think that might be a better question answered by maybe your analytics, deciding, is a lot of your audience using mobile devices versus a laptop or a desktop? With analytics, you can even get even more stats of what mobile devices those are. So that might be a great first step in trying to answer that question for you and yourself. And what do I mean by in-page navigation? Okay, so ways you might see in-page navigation is exactly in this example where you have this sidebar navigation. None of these links are available in the top line navigation. You can only see these links once I've landed on this page. Another way I've seen in-page navigation is you'll have like a line of buttons right below your hero image. And again, these links are not accessible through your top navigation. You can't see them in your navigation at all. They're only accessible once I've landed on a specific web page. I hope that clarifies that. Okay, let's move on. Autoplay videos. I'll still have time for questions, I believe. So autoplay videos, an accessibility nightmare. I'm specifically talking about background videos. They were super, super hot in 2020. I felt like 2020 was the year of videos. We were all moving towards this direction, probably since the birth of the internet. And, now we're seeing YouTube autoplays videos for you, and Facebook has autoplay ads that pop up in your feed. we're all getting used to and trained to having video sort of autoplay once we trying to draw our focus into whatever that content is. But they have pros and cons. One, they're super cool, can't deny that. But two, they have huge accessibility side effects. I personally have vertigo, so I'm very sensitive to movements. I can't even go into an IMAX theater without getting motion sickness. So seeing even that AMP background video for 5 to 10 seconds, I was already getting a little bit dizzy. So if I personally land on a site that automatically shows me like some crazy zooming flying drone through the mountains, I'm either going to scroll down immediately or I'm going to click off the site because I'm already feeling a bit nauseous. And I already associated a negative feeling to you and your brand, which is not what we want to be doing. So you want to be sensitive to, if you want to reach the widest audience possible, being sensitive to those kinds of effects is something that we should always be considering. Slower page load. We've gotten much smarter, I feel like, in 2020 about video compression and making sure our videos are short enough. But if you are having performance issues, and when I say performance issues, I mean if your page is loading in longer than 3 seconds. So I've seen a couple of sites where it takes like 10 seconds to load a page. That is quite annoying to your audience to have to wait for your page to load, and they may or may not wait there. And then you already lost them before they've even entered your site. So you want to make sure that any decisions you're making about your media isn't affecting your site performance in a very negative way. And then it's incredibly distracting. Having something moving on the screen is automatically going to grab the majority of your attention. We're just trained to see the things moving out of the corner of our eyes. And if the content that is over your background video or the content in the video isn't really what you want someone to be paying attention to, it's not really the main message that you're trying to convey on that page, it can be quite distracting, and they might miss that message entirely. So you do, again, want to be very thoughtful about the content pairing with those videos. I always like to suggest that we integrate video into content, but we allow the audience to choose whether or not they want to watch that video. The Yosemite example is a really great option here. It does two things. It's a hero with a really great statement on it. It orients you immediately to what the site is about, but it also is enticing and allows someone to watch a video content if they want. If you're going to use a background video, I would suggest choosing a short, slow-moving visuals that just create a general vibe on your site. Maybe it's just creating like a nice tone. Maybe it's just highlighting the values someone might get when they are looking around your content. You don't really want to put anything specific in there because, again, it's just really there as a really cool piece of art on your site. And if you're going to be using background videos, you need to also include a pause button. So if someone like me comes on your site, they are able to stop the video if they so choose, and then they can absorb your content. So then buttons, our last thing. So buttons. So I felt like in 2018, the issue around buttons was that we couldn't necessarily find them. There wasn't, we weren't really designing patterns for people to easily see the buttons on our pages, or there were just so many different kinds of designs that we weren't really sure how to interact with the site. And I felt like we've kind of gone the opposite way in 2020, where we've gotten really, really good at designing eye-catching buttons, but we are also now just trying to provide all of the pathways to our audiences. We want to give them everything possible at their fingertips. And this can have huge implications. There's this really wonderful user experience law called Hicks Law. And what it says is, the more options you provide your audience members, the longer it's going to take for them to make a decision. I think that's very true. And in some of the worst case scenarios, you provide so many options, they have no idea what to do and they don't do anything. So, being very mindful about providing too many pathways for your audience that they don't necessarily know what the main thing you want them to do is, or you're not providing them the clear pathway to the goal that they want to be reaching, is something that we always need to be concerned about. And then distracting. We've gotten, again, so good at creating very eye-catching buttons, and I think that's great. What we need to now pull back from is having too many loud buttons that are competing against each other for the attention of your audience. Like on this example, we have 4 yellow buttons, but we also have a blue, green, and red button, and they're all competing for your audience's attention. What I suggest in general for my clients to do is to create a button or link hierarchy. We really want to be very, very clear on our site. What is the main thing we want people to do, or what is the main thing they want to do on the site, and make that pathway super, super clear for people. So a way you can do this is having a filled in button, like this top right hand image has, is a filled in green button. And then the secondary thing, it's still a pathway. We're just not making it as prominent. We're not giving it as much visual attention. Having an outline button, or another way I've seen secondary links is just a text with a little arrow, or text that's underlined. So you really want to show visually to your audience that this is the main thing we want you to do. Here are some other links if you want. But this is the thing that we want you to pay attention to. And another thing with buttons, I just want to also say this quickly for accessibility. When you think about links and buttons, do not rely solely on color to identify interactivity. For individuals who are colorblind, like my grandpa, they might totally miss a link or button if you're just using color to say, hey, this is a link. You always want to use some kind of underline, some kind of icon, some kind of shape to also indicate that this is an interactive piece on the site. Okay, thank you so much. So that was the entirety of my presentation. I also have additional research that you might want to dive into further. A lot of this inspired the presentation I have today. So I'll provide these as well in the slides for after. I saw there was a few questions that came through that I'm gonna see what I can answer in the last few minutes. Oh, one. Okay, so we have a question about pop-ups. If we occasionally rarely use pop-ups, like year-end on a homepage, and it's not widespread, would Google punish that? I don't know. It's a really great question. What I don't know is how frequently Google is indexing sites and like assigning ratings. Like, is it in real time? Is it once a week? Is it once a month? That's a great question. I don't know if I can answer that. Oh, okay, we have a question on on-page navigation. So our web developers are recommending we use an on-page navigation for our secondary hierarchy navigation on mobile only, so that the main navigation doesn't get too cluttered. Ooh, thoughts? Yes. Oh, great question. So I guess I don't think it's a horrible idea. But I would be really interested in where you would be placing these secondary navigation in your mobile hierarchy. So again, like I said, I've seen a lot of applications where your sidebar navigation is below the main content of the page. And that may or may not work for you. You know, what we're assuming in that case is that someone's going to get through all of that content, be motivated enough to dive into those links at the bottom of the page. And it does also mean that those links are lower on the page. So they require a bit more effort in order to be seen. What's good about having those secondary navigation or hierarchy in the hierarchy in your top navigation, especially on mobile, is that it will always be available to you either in that hamburger experience or however you're dealing with that top navigation. So it's it's more readily accessible if you're still putting that second tier of content, in your top navigation. So it's just something to think about. How do you weigh links off a page for other internal page when the goal is an on-page conversion, donate or sign up? Oh, so how do you weigh links off a page, i.e. for other internal pages when a goal is, so especially with mission-driven clients that I've had, a lot of their main goals are donation or sign up. There's a few ways that I put visual weight to those asks that aren't necessarily just buttons. Sometimes with donate or with sign up, I dedicate a whole section of a page to like an on-page form, and one that allows us more space to catch the user's eye quickly, especially if they're scanning. And it makes it much easier for them to convert if we're already providing the steps on that page. So again, I try to put most of the emphasis on what is the main ask, what is the main thing we want them to do, and then everything comes secondary to that. So, just spend more time figuring out really what is the main thing. And there are many different ways that you can kind of tackle that design problem. What do you recommend to use instead of a carousel when you want to deliver several key messages on your homepage? Ooh, okay, so cards are a great use for this. Cards don't necessarily have to be links to other pages. It's just a way of organizing content in a nice box in one screenful. So if you have a couple, like let's say you want to highlight your 5 values, that would be great in like 5 boxes. It structures that section. It allows people to scan really easily because they can see and parse that information in their mind because there's lines around them. And you don't need someone to click the arrows or watch the auto scroll in order to see all the content you want to provide them. All right, last one quickly. Thoughts on WordPress versus Wix theme building sites like Gutenberg? Ooh. Or do you recommend to go with a custom web development for better impact and quality of website? Are there, gosh, I really don't have a preference. I think it all really depends on what your budget is and really what you want to be saying. The thing that Wix and WordPress really have is you have more of an ability to customize whatever your messaging is, but really it's messaging first, and then once you figure that out, all of the design and the choices that you make about layout, I think, are much easier. All right, I guess that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. If you have additional questions, I wasn't able to get to them all, please feel free to email me. Please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to spend a bit of time with you. And there is a session evaluation, I believe, on the page. Feel free to evaluate this session if you wish I could improve. I'm always open ears. I'm always open to feedback.